Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and this presentation is titled My Ill Fated TWA Interview and Hare Krishnas at LAX in 1979. Now, in this time frame, I had decided that I was going to get out of the Air Force and I was getting an airline job, so I started doing interviews. My first interview was with United Airlines, and I think it went fairly well, and I guess it did because they eventually hired me, but they used a two-part process. You had a first interview, which was kind of quick and dirty, and if they liked you, they thought about it, they'd call you back for a second interview. So it was really nice. They gave me a positive space ticket to fly from LAX, I was out at Edwards Air Force Base, up to Denver to do the interview, and that was very nice. And then in the meantime, I received a invite to come to the interview at TWA, and this was kind of a one-shot deal where you came and you interviewed, and then they let you know in fairly short order if they liked you. And TWA at the time was a decent airline. It was starting to have some trouble, but this was early in deregulation era, and we hadn't seen the type of damage that that could come about. So I go out to LAX. Now, I was in the Air Force. I did not take commercial flights virtually at all. So this is a new area for me. You know, these big airports and everything that goes along. And I go out to the TWA terminal, and TWA was not as nice as United. They did not give me positive space. It was standby travel. Well, I didn't know really much about what standby travel was. Well, it was kind of a rude awakening because I was trying to get from LAX to Kansas City for the interview, and the flights were full, and I was missing quite a few. Well, at the time, they had a lot of these Hare Krishnas in the airport. If you remember that time frame at all, you remember that they were in the terminals. Of course, people could get in the terminals a lot easier than they can now. But they were in the terminals, and they would try to give/sell you this book. Well, I didn't know much was going on, and this lady, who looks a lot like this lady in this picture, approached me with this book very nicely, and she gives me the book, and okay, that's fine. Then she talks to me a little bit. I had some time to kill. I was waiting for the flight, and then she wants money for the book, and I said, well, I'm not going to pay you for the book. You said it. You said you gave me the book. Well, no, here's your book back. So, okay, enough of that. Well, I would go from one terminal to the next gate because I just wasn't getting on the flights. And I was kind of watching it, and I went by her several times. And the first couple of times, she didn't remember that she had already approached me. So I said, hey, no, not interested in stuff like that. So about the third or fourth time I went by her, she was starting to get kind of nasty to me, and I didn't like that very much. But I noticed that she was getting her books out of one of the lockers. And at the time, you had lockers in the terminal where you could store stuff safely, I guess, if you wanted to go out and get something to eat and you didn't want to carry stuff around. So she had all her books, a big stack of books in one of these lockers. Well, she wasn't locking the locker. She just was using it. You know, the key was in there. She would open up, get a book. She'd get some sucker to take the book and then come back and get another book. Well, I watched this a few times, and, you know, you're sitting in an airport, you're kind of bored. You're thinking, well, what am I going to do for fun, you know? So I'm looking at that, and I go over, and I take her books, and I move them to another locker about 10 feet away. I come back. I put a quarter in. At the time, you could get these things for a quarter. I put the quarter in. I took the key out. I locked it. I put the key with her books there. And I go back and I sat down. Well, she got rid of another book. So she comes back. She pulls on the locker and nothing happens. I mean, it's locked. She can't open it. And she's looking at it, trying to figure this out. And she looked at the lockers around. Maybe she got the wrong locker or something. You know, I don't know. And she couldn't find any books. And she was pretty sure that was her locker. So she goes away. And she gets this guy with just a million keys to come on over. And, of course, in the meantime, I had figured she was doing something like this. So I take the key out of her locker. I put it back in there, and I unlock it. So now her locker is unlocked, but there's no books in there. I didn't put the books back. So he comes up with these million keys. She points to the locker, and she's going, wait a minute. There's a key in there. And she pulls it open. She opens it. And course, there are no books in there. It's an empty locker, but it's not locked. And the guy's kind of, what are you doing here, lady? Shaking her head. And at that time, they called me for my flight. So I'm not sure if she ever found her books or not. But that was my little entertainment for the time. Yeah, I know I'm bad. Okay. Well, I was with another guy, by the way. We were both trying to get to Kansas City, and they put us on the flight. And they put us back there. It was a crowded flight. And they're just about ready to push and shut the door, and I hear the agent come to the front, and he talks to the flight attendant, and he says, we put 2 standbys on. We got to get those guys off. We got 2 paying passengers. We need to put in their seats. And I go, oh, crud, we're going to lose another one, and we were so close. But he doesn't remember where he put us, which was kind of interesting back there. I guess they didn't have as good of a system, so he didn't remember where they put us. So anyway, he goes up and down the aisle, and I tell the guy, just kind of, we're reading our book here, keep your face down. And he finally gives up, shakes his head and walks off, closes the door. And we get on the TWA L1011, and we head on up to Kansas City. Okay, we get there, we go to their administration building, and we're having an interview. And we go through, various process simulator tests. That was downtown, and that was kind of a not very nice location building or anything. I was not impressed compared to United Center. But we had the interview with a number of people and 2 captains. And one captain was very hostile, and the other guy was reasonably friendly. It was almost like a good cop, bad cop. I don't know if that was intended or if that was their personalities. But the one guy was asking me, and he wasn't very nice about it. He's asking me questions, and I'm answering it. And I don't know if he didn't understand about what it was like to fly in flight test or something, but I didn't feel like I was getting along with him very well. And then he says to me, there's a blackboard there, and he says, "Tell me how a jet engine works." And I said, "Well, sir, how much detail do you want?" And he says, "You tell me as much detail as you possibly can." Well, at the time, I was taking a master's level course in compressible fluid flow, and it was taught by instructors from the Air Force Test Pilot School. So all of this is oriented right towards aviation and jet engines and all sorts of stuff. So it was really great information. So man, I if you want to talk about jet engines, man, I could talk about jet engines. So, the book goes into a lot of detail, and I start writing a few equations up there, and I start drawing a couple graphs. I start talking about mass flow and stagnation, air temperature and stuff like that. And I wasn't trying to be a smart aleck, and, I was out there at Edwards with a bunch of very bright pilots, and I kind of was thinking, well, all pilots understood, compressible fluid flow at the master's degree level and stuff. And I later realized that really not all airline pilots do understand it at that level. And I probably did more to kind of tick him off than anything else, because I'm starting to talk about stagnation, air temperature in the compressor section. And he says, "Okay, I think you understand it. That's good enough. We're done with that." Well, a couple weeks later, I get my rejection letter from TWA. This was 1979 when I was interviewing. I get a rejection letter, and I've got boxes full of files, and I know I still have that letter, and I wanted to put it up here as a little slide because it's kind of nice, because that was probably one of the best interview letters I could have gotten. Because here I am now. I get hired by United Airlines. I go through, various seats, and finally I'm up to the point of being a captain on the 727. And I get my crew, and I get a new second officer, and he comes on board. Second officer is the flight engineer. He comes on board, and we start chit-chatting, and he says, "Yeah, I used to work for TWA." And I go, "Really?" I go, "When did you get hired?" And he goes, "1979. And I said, "Well, that's interesting," because things didn't go very well for him at TWA, and he ended up getting, furloughed, and he finally came on to United Airlines, and of course he lost all that seniority, and he's now my second officer. So I looked at him, I said, I interviewed in 1979 with TWA. I said, if they would have hired me, and United would have hired you, you would have been in my seat as captain, and I would have been in your seat as second officer. And yeah, that was kind of interesting. And I had one other situation like that, where a pilot, a major out at the flight test center at Edwards, had been hired also by TWA. Just shortly after I left, I didn't know he was going to get out of the Air Force, but he got out of the Air Force and got hired by TWA. Same thing. I'm in Peoria. I go down there to talk to the second officer, and I start looking at him, and I go, and I was captain on the 27. I go, Jack? And he goes, yeah. And I go, Jack, and I give his last name. Yeah, I don't want to get too much detail. I give his last name, and he goes, yeah. And I go, it's Ron. And he looks at me. Of course, I'm in uniform, the captain's hat, and I cover up my mustache because when I was in the Air Force, I didn't have a mustache. I cover it up, and I go, Ron Rogers. And he goes, oh my gosh, yeah, I remember you. How's it going? How's yours? Oh, well, your seniority is obviously pretty good because you're a captain. And he was a major, great test pilot, and now he's a second officer on the 27. So funny things can happen to seniority. But that is my ill-fated tale of my interview with TWA, which, like I said, was probably one of the best things that happened to me interview-wise. I hope you enjoyed this little story. Thanks for listening.